Hello, everyone. Welcome to our online video series, Reading Hope in Trying Times. Our guest today is Vivian Mabuni. Vivian is a national speaker and author with a passion to disciple leaders who will love God and influence families, communities, and the world to help spread the flourishing of God's kingdom in every place. With over 30 years serving on staff with Cru, she loves teaching about the Bible and its practical application to ministry and life. Vivian is currently working on her MA in Bible Exposition at Talbot Seminary. She's author of Warrior in Pink and Open Hands, Willing Heart, and host of the podcast Someday is Here for Asian American women on ethnic journey and leadership. So it's really great to have you here with us today, Vivian. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Brian. It's great to meet you finally.
Yes, same here. Before we were recording, we were talking about all the tremendous people who we know in common, which is obviously, a wonderful thing. So maybe you can start by just, sharing some of your thoughts on this pandemic that we're going through.
Where do we begin? First of all, I think, unless Jesus comes back in the next, 40 years or so, I'm thinking that our children's children, that sweet little granddaughter that you have on your mug, will be reading about this pandemic in history books. And it's so eerie to me. We're in the middle of an experience that none of us in our lifetime has ever experienced. And it has many layers to it. I think the fact that it's not just one major crisis like a huge earthquake in Southern California where it's an event, and then there's the rebuilding and all of that. This is kind of an ongoing worldwide problem that we are all facing. So I think it's really surfacing a lot of underlying issues in our government and structures, in resourcing, power dynamics, decision-making. There's just so many factors that are part of what we're experiencing in addition to the disease and COVID-19 and all of that. So I find it challenging personally, just as an Asian American woman. Since the pandemic began in China, there's a rise right now in the United States of anti-Asian racism. So that's been something that I have been very acutely aware of. And as the world gets smaller because of social media, we're able to see, just some of the horrific things that are being said and done to Asian Americans in real time, as people have videotapes and, all of that. It's been sobering, and it's been emotionally draining and taxing at times. And then there's just an underlying loss, I think, that all of us are experiencing, of events that we thought would take place that aren't taking place, opportunities, job opportunities that are lost, jobs that are lost. It goes on and on. So probably I think I feel very sobered in realizing how dependent we truly are on one another. And there's this domino effect that one thing affects another thing, affects another thing. And I feel like we're just on the beginnings of seeing that. And I don't think that we're necessarily going to, once the shelter in place is lifted, it's not going to turn back to normal. I think we're going to have several more like new normals that will come into our experience. So it's sobering to me, honestly, Brian. I think it's, I don't want to dwell too much in the negative news. It's sometimes hard to discern what sources to trust, at times, but I am definitely trying to stay mindful while also aware of the weight of what's going on.
So you're in Southern California, so I'm a little curious as to kind of what's it been like there in terms of, people's habits and how that's all changed.
Yeah, I think we were, if I'm not mistaken, I think we were one of the first states to do the shelter in place. I think especially in Northern California, but Southern California followed suit pretty quickly. So we were in shelter in place by, I believe, the 18th of March. So that might be middle, early, but all of us, continue to do so. I think we're in Orange County, which is just south of Los Angeles. So Los Angeles has set in, more parameters. So I think in Los Angeles right now, it's required that you wear a mask when you go outside. That's not necessarily true in Southern California, in Orange County, but I would say probably 80% of the people I see out going about have masks on. So, so I think we're trying to maintain and honor, the idea of staying home saves lives, and recognizing that. I think there was recently a protest in Huntington Beach, which is about 45 minutes north of us, to open up. Let's just, economically we need to start, get the engine revved up again, and so that has been met with a lot of concern as well. So it just feels like the rubber band is getting pulled tighter and tighter.
I spent a lot of time in Asia in my previous life, in high tech. And one of the things I always noticed there is that people, despite any of this pandemic stuff, oftentimes will wear masks
Mm-hmm.
just as a common habit.
Yeah.
Whereas, that's not habit here in the United States typically. So
Yeah.
I think it was easier for them to, at least several different countries, to adopt,
Mm-hmm.
that norm, just because it was more of a norm to start with.
Sure. Yeah. It was interesting because I went out to get groceries last week, and I went to Ralph's, which is like a Kroger or just a mainline store that's across the country. So I was at Ralph's, and then I went to a Persian market, which I usually go to get all my my fresh vegetables, because the prices are great and the assortment is unmatched, and I love this little Persian market. So so it was interesting though, because when I first went to the Ralph, it was probably maybe 2 or 3% of the people shopping there were wearing masks, mostly white. And then when I went to the Persian market, it was probably 85% of the people wearing masks voluntarily. And so I mentioned that to my husband, and he goes, I wonder if that's some of the culture of, being part of an Asian culture. It's very collective. And so there's a sense of how it's not about my rights, it's that my actions or inactions may affect others. And so we go the extra mile to be mindful of the collective. And so I think that that's some of what we've seen too. I think some of the success that we've seen in other countries that have seen a decline has, I think, been very much about collective. I don't think it would fly in the United States, because here in the U.S., our value system is so individualistic, and it's my rights, and it's, I haven't gotten a haircut yet, so we should, change this so that I can get what I want, instead of this collective, which I think is very, woven into the DNA of a lot of Eastern cultures.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great observation. I think that, and just the, practicality of wearing the masks sooner too,
Yeah.
absolutely, made a difference a lot of different places. So you worked for Crew for many years, and they have a big international presence too. Have you heard much about how that's all impacted by this?
I'm not as involved with the international side of things. I've just heard like stories here and there, but I know that there was definitely needing to respond quickly with those missionaries who are serving in Asian countries, trying to get people back to the U.S. who are American. It's been a lot of work on top of work, I think, to respond well, during this time. So it's been fascinating to watch everything shift to online. I've been invited to speak at their weekly meetings, but it's through Zoom. So they're asking, can you just use your phone and tape a 30-minute talk, and we'll just show it? I'm like, so I think that, people are trying to be creative and continue to meet and, do the work of ministry, but it's very, very different. So yeah, so I'm not entirely sure how things are going, except for that we do have, staff all around the world, and thus far I don't think we've I don't think we've had many personal cases of our staff, walking through COVID-19 personally. I know that like a handful, and there's always that fear, I think, opening up the emails like, okay, who do we know someone personally? Do we know someone, a few degrees separated that is being affected by the pandemic? So.
Well, at least, we do have some of these communication tools, unlike the so-called Spanish flu in the 1918, period when,
Yeah,
none of this existed. So at least we
sure.
can stay in touch across the world or across the country.
Yeah.
So one of the things we've been discussing, during these interviews is just kind of how God's helped us in challenging times in the past. And,
Mm-hmm.
You've certainly been through your share. So if you'd like to discuss a little bit about that, that would really be great.
Sure. Um, so I am a cancer survivor, a breast cancer survivor, and that was actually the when I look back now, I realize that God actually used cancer to pull the writer out of me. I don't think I ever considered myself a writer, but as I was walking through this cancer journey, my best friend opened up a Caring Bridge medical blog, and that was the way that I could kind of keep up with people and share what was going on, so our phone wouldn't just keep ringing and ringing and ringing. So so I started, and what began as just like medical updates, these stories started to come, and I was just sharing them, and to me it was a very worshipful experience. I wasn't editing, I was just writing. I didn't feel pressure to have to make God look good and wrap everything up with a nice little Bible verse and a bow at the end. It was really like in real time, this is what's going on. And I think at the time, I was 42. I was as healthy as I'd been. All 3 kids were now in school full time. All these doors were opening. I was so excited. And I think I was not familiar with just medical challenges. I probably had taken Advil 2 or 3 times a year, and that was about the extent of my medical needs. And so to be thrust into the cancer journey with, so many doctor's appointments and having to deal with all these medical decisions and new vocabulary and all of that, it really softened my heart to what suffering is like, and even chronic pain, and walking through the difficulties that I think all of us sooner or later experience. And so that's kind of the backdrop of what has been those hard-won lessons. And so when I think about being in the situation now, and actually even having this conversation with you, Brian, is helpful, because I'm thinking, just like the Israelites, I need to keep remembering. I need to remember and remember God's faithfulness from a time past, because He is still the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. So even in preparing and thinking through this conversation, on one hand, I was thinking, I have really nothing to share about anything. And then I thought, but I have walked through a really dark time and seen God's faithfulness through all of that. And so so my first book is Warrior in Pink, and it's a memoir about cancer, community, and the God who comforts. And as I was flipping through the pages this morning before we got on, I was like, oh, I need to remember. And I think this is why God gives us the Bible, so that we can remember, and we can be right along with the Israelites who so quickly forget. But our hearts are prone to wander, and we just need those reminders time and again. So some of the lessons, I think, that have come from the cancer journey that kind of flows into what we're going through now. The first is learning to give myself and the people around me grace. So as it was for the cancer journey, I had never gone through anything like that before, and neither had anyone else that was close to me. And so all of us were bumping up against each other, trying to figure out how to respond, how to love well, how to even communicate through the time. And so once again, we're thrust into this situation where none of us have been in this position before, where we are trying to figure out sheltering in place and toilet paper and, shortages of masks and school getting canceled on and on and on and on. So it's like learning to give myself grace and learning to give those around me grace and recognizing, none of us have been here before, and we're all trying to do the best we can. So that's one thing. The other thing is that, well, two other things that come to mind. One is that we, our capacity to take in difficulty, it's like a sponge, like emotional difficulties like a sponge, and it gets filled. And so when we're going through our own difficulties and trials, it's hard to take on anymore. So I remember in the middle of cancer, there was a huge earthquake in Haiti, and I was unable to engage in that because my own emotional sponge was just so full of just all the struggles that we've been going through. And that, again, I think we can only take so much of the heartbreak that's taking place all around us, and to maybe understand that our sponges might be maxing out right now because we're inundated with so many sad stories, and we start to, I think we just start to max out, and it doesn't mean that we aren't compassionate, but it could mean just that we are in a place where we're just maxed out and our sponge is completely full. So that's another thing that I'm finding, just being weary as I go through the news feeds and feeling like I can't take in another sad story because I'm just, I have no more capacity right now. We have some dear friends that are walking through cancer in the midst of COVID-19, and I can't imagine what it would be like, honestly, to have to go through chemo and, all of these things by yourself because you can't allow people to come into the room. I mean, it's just a very, very different scenario. So those are just a few thoughts.
One of my grandsons had lymphoma when he was 3.
Oh,
and
wow.
same kind of thing. I cannot imagine, him and his family having to go through that now.
Right.
I mean, it was tough enough then, and with the different constraints, as you said, in terms of, interaction
Mm-hmm.
and attention, right? I mean, so many of the hospitals are having to take attention away from, non-COVID to deal with
Yes,
COVID, right? So,
totally. Yeah.
that would really be a difficult thing to bear right now.
Yeah. Yeah. I think so.
So what about, any kind of resources that you found to be helpful, books, anything for you during this time now?
Well, probably goes without saying, but the Bible, because timeless, and again, my heart needing to be recalibrated because it's so easy for me to lose sight of even God's character in the midst of difficulty. I did want to share something that I learned that was encouraging that comes out of Warrior in Pink that I wanted to
Sure, that'd
maybe
be great.
read. So this is about, this is toward the end. So, but it was this little nugget I think could be helpful maybe for some of those who are in a hard time right now. But I'm picking this up at the last chapter, the beginning of the end in New Beginnings. And it's on page 165. It says, abundance in my mind has always been a picture of bountiful grapes on a grapevine. One of my favorite Bible passages is John 15:4-5. Abide in me and I in you, as the branch cannot bear fruit of itself unless it abides in the vine, so neither can you unless you abide in me. I'm the vine, you are the branches. He who abides in me and I in him, he bears much fruit, for apart from me you can do nothing. Not long ago, I learned that the best wine comes from grapes that have experienced an especially difficult season, be it drought or flooding. The drastic change in weather unleashes something in the grapes that produces an exceptional wine. The parallels to life were too significant to overlook. We all know people walk through difficult seasons with rain that sometimes that doesn't seem to end, or dryness and heat that cracks the earth. Some become bitter and resentful and die on the inside. But those who choose to sink their roots deep into God's word and show up even after reaching the end of their physical limitations and emotional capacities are the ones who have learned intimacy with God. They walk through rather than run away or numb away from disappointment, grief, and despair. They abide or remain in the vine even when the environment is extreme. And as a result, they display a beauty emanating from deep places. These people become the exceptional wine, set apart in flavor and quality. They stand out. We admire them for strong character. That character comes through difficulty, discipline, and not giving up when circumstances threaten to take away life. In wine country, some grapevines are over 125 years old. They no longer need to be watered. The root system runs 20 to 30 feet underground. The grapes produced from these vines are faithful, dependable, certain. And year after year, these grapes produce exceptional wine. Fire and water trials are unavoidable. And as much as I want to protect my children from struggles, I know they will arrive at points in their lives when they will have to decide if they will move into the pain or try to numb it. Will the trials produce bitter hearts or exceptional character? From the time we returned home from the hospital with each of our kids, I have prayed that they would know and love God, and I have asked God to bless them with good friends, good mentors, and a strong sense of self. With a solid relationship with God, the help of friends, the input of mentors, and an understanding of who God has made them, I know they'll be able to make it through whatever difficulties loom ahead. I've experienced this to be true in my own life. I want my kids to have what I consider to be more important than wealth, status, or education. I want them to journey community, known and beloved deeply by God and by others, to live abundant lives.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. I love the analogy with the grapevine.
Yeah, I am thinking a lot on these things these days because it's springtime, and so my husband is like redoing the backyard and planting and weeding, and we're seeing new life, and it's as God meant it to be, that we are a part of seasons and growth and even these challenges, as you know, in this illustration, that even like the most exceptional wines come from the grapes that have endured drought or flooding. And I just think this is a time when we are in the midst of drought and flooding in different ways, emotionally and experientially. I think a lot of us are experiencing insecurity that we've never known before. And it's an opportunity, I think, for us to really lean into the Lord rather than shake our fist at him.
One of the things I've discovered in having some of these conversations with authors is, basically what you're saying about this being a unique opportunity to learn and reflect and write about that, that was unexpected, and that, there's certainly a universality of this. So that whatever people, I think, have to say and reflect on this now, everyone's going to get it.
Yeah.
Everyone's really going to be able to relate to it very, very easily, because the whole world is going through some flavor of this.
Yeah, that's really true.
So, Vivian, in the introduction, I mentioned that you do a podcast. So I'm a little bit curious about, how that's going during this period of time.
Yeah. Well, it actually has been a very enjoyable, well, I don't know if it could say enjoyable, but it's been a helpful place, honestly, to still work at things, because so many of the speaking events got canceled, and so I've been able to redirect some of the energy towards the podcast. But the podcast is called Someday is Here, and it's a podcast for Asian American women about our ethnic journey and leadership. But my hope is that non-Asians would also listen to be able to learn about Asian American culture, because it's different than straight like Asian culture from Asia. It's a fusion of Eastern and Western values. And so I've interviewed a number of phenomenal women and leaders and influencers, authors and speakers. And when COVID-19 started kicking in and all the anti-Asian racism, I actually ended up interviewing Eugene Cho, Helen Lee, Judy Wu Dominic, and Sienna Reeves. The two of them are epidemiologists. So we talked about why using the term Chinese virus is so harmful to the Asian American community. And we talked about that at length, and so I think we can probably link in that particular episode.
Yeah,
But
that'd be great.
yeah, so I think that there's, I think part of the hope of the podcast is that there would be a space for non-Asians to just listen and learn and understand some of the challenges that come about being Asian American. Even I even interviewed an adoptee who was raised by white parents, who's Korean, Korean American, and what it's like to be raised in a white environment as an Asian. So it's really, there's a mixed race. That's a whole other, untapped, under-resourced area, I think, at this current time. So that has been a huge joy to be able to help kind of like what you're doing, Brian, like introducing people to really great people is a very, very enjoyable experience. And so
isn't it incredibly worthwhile to be able to do that?
So great. Yes.
I'm very thankful for being
Yeah, so I mean, I could do that all day long. So, and out of that, actually, right before the country shut down, we had our first live event where we met up in Southern California. And I think what was so incredible were all of these speakers came on their own dime, because I didn't have any money to pay for, anything. So they found their own housing, and they made their way out here, and 180 women showed up.
Wow.
Yeah,
Awesome.
and some flew in from as far as the East Coast, and it was a space, I think, for many of them. It was the first time that every single speaker was Asian American and an Asian American woman, and I think there was just this complete exhale that took place. It's almost like, when I watched Crazy Rich Asians, it was like, to see the lead actors and just the whole movie, and that sense of like, wow, this is what it's like for most of my white brothers and sisters all of the time. Like, this is the experience, but it's
Yeah,
like
but we
I'm
just take it for
experiencing
granted, though.
exactly.
And whereas for you it's new. I mean, it's completely different.
Yeah,
So it's a much
yeah,
different experience.
yeah. So representation matters, and so part of that, the hope of the podcast as well, is to just break down some of the stereotypes. Like, Asian Americans can be typecast a certain way, but it's so helpful to see examples of Asian American women who are doing incredible work in all sorts of different places, and not your traditional, what you would consider are Asian American women. So that's some of it. So I've really, really enjoyed being in a place to create in a different way, via the podcast route.
Yeah, so we'd love to share more about that. So please, send that along, and I'll make sure that it gets communicated through our channels.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. I really do.
Well, Vivian, it was really a pleasure to spend some time with you. I greatly appreciate the opportunity to get to know you a little bit better, and I'm so glad we had this time to talk, and thank you for enlightening us in many different ways.
Well, thanks for having me, Brian. It's great to meet you, and I look forward to eventually meeting you in person.
Yes, exactly. Once this all gets through, we will definitely do that.
All right.